My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 4 months ago, I watched my director take the report I had worked on for 6 months, literally rip it in half in front of 30 people, and tell me, "Sarah, you need to do something worthy for once in your life." She stood there, holding the pieces of paper like it was garbage, while my entire department watched in absolute silence. What she didn't know is that she had just destroyed the one thing keeping our company profitable. And when my phone rang 3 hours later with an offer of $800,000 annually, I realized she had just handed me the perfect weapon for the most elegant revenge I could have ever planned. Before I tell you exactly how her humiliation became my greatest professional triumph, could you take a second to hit like on this video and subscribe? Because what I'm about to share will show you how one moment of cruelty can backfire in ways that seem impossible until they happen right in front of you. And trust me, you need to hear every detail of how an arrogant director destroyed her own career the moment she thought she was destroying mine. Let me take you back to where this really began. Because revenge stories always start much earlier than when the revenge actually happens. 2 years ago, I joined Digital Innovation as a senior process analyst. The company was a growing tech consultancy, one of those that promises to revolutionize how businesses handle their data. My job was to study our clients' internal systems, identify inefficiencies, and design solutions that would optimize their operations. My director, Patricia Vega, was one of those women who climbed to the top by stepping on everyone along the way. She had been with the company since its early days, 5 years before, and acted like she owned the place. She had that "I know more than everyone" attitude that makes every meeting feel like an interrogation where she's the prosecutor and you're the defendant. From day one, Patricia made it clear she didn't expect much from me. "Analysts come and go," she told me during my first week. "Some understand that this job requires excellence, others settle for mediocrity. I hope you're not one of the latter." But I was determined to prove her wrong. I arrived an hour before everyone else, stayed late, studied every process with obsessive detail. It wasn't just work for me. It was my opportunity to prove I could be exceptional at something I was genuinely passionate about. In my first 6 months, I identified problems in 3 major client systems that had gone unnoticed for years. For Ramirez Industries, I discovered they were losing $2.3 million annually due to an error in their inventory system that was duplicating certain records. For Fernandez Group, I found their billing process had a gap that allowed some payments to get lost in the system, costing them $1.8 million per year. But my biggest discovery came when I worked with Herrera Construction. After 3 months analyzing their operations, I realized they were using a project management system that wasn't just inefficient, but was causing delays that cost them approximately $4.2 million in late delivery penalties. Every time I presented these findings to Patricia, she would review them with that disapproving expression that seemed to be her natural state. "It's fine," she'd say, as if I had just shown her the most basic work in the world. I expected a bit more depth in the analysis, but I suppose it's a good start. A good start. After identifying more than $8 million in losses that our clients didn't even know they had. But I kept working, convinced she would eventually recognize my value. What I didn't understand was that Patricia saw my success as a threat. Every problem I identified was a problem she had overlooked. Every million I saved for our clients was evidence that maybe she wasn't as indispensable as she believed. The tension reached its peak when our CEO, Robert Salinas, mentioned during a monthly meeting that clients were especially satisfied with the quality of analysis they were receiving. "Sarah has identified efficiencies that are generating significant savings," he said. "Her work is setting a new standard for our department." I saw Patricia's face harden as Robert spoke. After the meeting, she found me in the office kitchen. "I don't know what kind of impression you're trying to make," she said, her voice low but loaded with venom. "But this job isn't about showing off. It's about following established processes and maintaining professional standards." That's when I decided I needed to do something she couldn't ignore or minimize. Something that would demonstrate irrefutably that my approach wasn't just valid, but revolutionary. I proposed creating a master report that would document all the inefficiencies I had identified during my 2 years at the company, along with the implemented solutions and measured financial impact. It would be a comprehensive analysis we could use as a model for future projects and as a sales tool for potential clients. Patricia approved the project, but with one condition. You have 6 months to complete it. And you better make sure it's something exceptional, because if it turns out to be another mediocre presentation, it'll be the last time you waste company time on these experiments. I spent the next 6 months living and breathing that report. I documented every process, every inefficiency, every solution, every dollar saved. I included detailed charts, trend analyses, long-term impact projections. I interviewed clients to get testimonials about how our solutions had transformed their operations. The final report was 247 pages of analysis that demonstrated how a systematic and detailed approach to process analysis had generated more than $23 million in savings for our clients over 2 years. It wasn't just a report. It was a complete manual on how to revolutionize process consulting. I was proud of that work. It represented not just 6 months of effort, but 2 years of learning, growth, and measurable results. It was definitive proof that my approach wasn't just valid, but superior to the traditional methods the company had been using, which made what happened next so devastating. Patricia scheduled a department-wide meeting to review my report. She called together all 30 members of our team, including other directors, senior analysts, and even administrative staff. She said she wanted to use my work as an example of what we expect from our analysts. I arrived at the meeting with a printed copy of the report for each person, plus a digital presentation I had prepared to explain the most important findings. I was nervous but also excited. Finally, I would have the opportunity to show what I had accomplished. Patricia began the meeting by explaining that she had asked everyone to come because it was important to establish clear standards for analysis work. "We've had some problems with work quality," she said, looking directly at me, "and I think it's time to address these problems directly." She asked me to distribute copies of my report while she set up the projector. I could see my colleagues flipping through the pages, some with expressions of genuine impression. Maria Santos, a senior analyst, whispered to me, "Sarah, this is incredible. I've never seen such detailed analysis." But when Patricia finished reviewing my presentation, her expression wasn't that of someone about to recognize exceptional work. It was the expression of someone who had found exactly what they were looking for to justify a decision they had already made. "This report," she began, projecting the first page on the screen, "is a perfect example of what we don't want to see in our department." She stood up and walked to the screen, using a laser pointer to highlight different sections. "It's full of unnecessary details, excessive analysis that adds no value, and an obsession with documentation that distracts from real work." I felt like someone had emptied a bucket of ice water over my head. I looked around the room and saw the confused faces of my colleagues. Some had been taking notes from my report, clearly impressed by the depth of analysis. "Sarah," Patricia continued, "you've spent 6 months creating what is essentially a self-promotion exercise disguised as professional analysis. This type of work is exactly what we don't need in a serious company." But then she did something that crossed a line I never expected her to cross. She took her printed copy of the report, the only physical copy that was on the presentation table, and tore it in half. The sound of paper ripping filled the conference room in absolute silence. "Sarah," she said, holding the pieces of paper like they were garbage, "you need to do something worthy for once in your life. This type of mediocre work has no place at Digital Innovation." She had physically broken my report in front of 30 people. 6 months of work, 247 pages of analysis that had proven to generate millions in savings, reduced to pieces of paper in her hands while she lectured me about mediocrity. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and someone's nervous pen clicking. Some of my colleagues looked at their hands. Others looked at me with expressions of shock and sympathy. No one knew what to say. "From now on," Patricia continued, throwing the pieces of paper in the trash, "we expect all reports to be concise, direct, and focused on results, not on impressing people with unnecessary volume." I sat there, hands trembling, trying to process what had just happened. It wasn't just the public humiliation. It was the realization that no matter how good my work was, how much value I added, how many problems I solved, Patricia had decided I was mediocre, and no amount of evidence would make her change her mind. But she had made a crucial miscalculation. By physically ripping my report, she had provided the perfect moment of theater for her humiliation. But she hadn't destroyed the real work. All the digital copies were intact. All the data, all the analysis, all the client testimonials that demonstrated the impact of my work. And apparently some people had been paying more attention to my work than any of us had imagined. My phone started vibrating before Patricia finished her sermon about professional standards. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something told me I should step out to answer. I left the conference room with legs still shaking from adrenaline and humiliation. "Sarah Mitchell?" said a professional voice on the other end of the line. "This is Carlos Mendoza from Mendoza Strategic Consulting. We've been following your work at Digital Innovation, and we need to speak with you urgently." The conversation that followed would change everything. Mendoza Strategic Consulting was a boutique consulting firm that specialized in working with medium and large companies to optimize their operations. They had been monitoring the work of several consultants in the industry, and my name had come up repeatedly in conversations with satisfied clients. "Your analyses for Ramirez Industries, Fernandez Group, and Herrera Construction have been extraordinary," Carlos told me. "Those clients didn't just implement your recommendations, they've been recommending them to other companies. Your approach is generating a ripple effect in the industry." It turned out my work had been circulating in professional networks without my knowledge. Satisfied clients had been sharing my analyses with other executives, using my methodologies as examples of exceptional consulting. Mendoza Strategic Consulting had received multiple requests from companies that wanted the type of deep analysis I had been providing. "We're prepared to offer you $800,000 annually to join our team as Director of Strategic Analysis," Carlos said, "plus profit sharing and complete autonomy over your analysis methodologies. We want you to build a department based exactly on the approach you've been developing. $800,000. More than triple my current salary, with the opportunity to lead a department and the freedom to implement my methods without interference." But the most satisfying part of the offer wasn't the money. "We know you can't take proprietary information from your current company," Carlos continued, "but we also know that innovative methodologies don't belong to any particular company. If you decide to join us, we'd be delighted for you to implement your deep analysis approach with our clients." I immediately understood what he was implying. He wasn't asking me to steal information or violate any legal agreements. He was simply recognizing that my approach, my methodology, my way of thinking about process analysis, that was mine. And if I left and decided to apply those skills elsewhere, that was my decision. When I returned to the conference room, Patricia was still explaining why conciseness was more important than depth in process analysis, using my torn report as an example of what not to do. The pieces of paper were still in the trash, a visual reminder of her point. I waited until she finished her presentation, until she asked if anyone had questions about the new standards she had established. Then I raised my hand. "Patricia," I said, my voice surprisingly firm after the humiliation I had experienced, "I have something to announce to the team." The entire room turned toward me. Patricia frowned, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Sarah, if you have questions about the new procedures, we can discuss them after the meeting." "These aren't questions about procedures," I said, standing up. "It's a resignation. I'm leaving Digital Innovation, effective immediately." The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different silence. It was the silence of shock, of anticipation, of the realization that they were witnessing something significant. "What?" Patricia stammered, clearly thrown by this unexpected turn. "You can't just quit in the middle of a departmental meeting." "Actually, I can," I replied, taking out my phone to show the confirmation email I had just sent to Human Resources. "I just accepted a position as Director of Strategic Analysis at Mendoza Strategic Consulting. I start Monday." The change in Patricia's expression was instant, from arrogant confidence to something that looked almost like panic. "Mendoza Strategic Consulting," she repeated, as if trying to process the information. That's our direct competition." "Yes," I said, picking up my bag and heading toward the door. It turns out they value the type of deep analysis you consider mediocre. In fact, they hired me specifically for my detailed approach and my ability to identify inefficiencies that others overlook. Robert Salinas, our CEO, who had been observing from the back of the room, stepped forward. Sarah, maybe we should discuss this privately before making hasty decisions. But I was done with private discussions and diplomatic solutions. Patricia had chosen to humiliate me publicly, so she would experience the consequences with the same publicity. There's nothing to discuss, I said. My decision is final. I'll submit my formal resignation documentation within an hour. As I walked toward the door, I could feel 30 pairs of eyes following my movements. Some of my colleagues looked surprised, others impressed. And some, especially the younger analysts, seemed to be reconsidering their own career options. Patricia shouted at me as I left, "You're making a huge mistake. Mendoza Strategic Consulting doesn't have the reputation or stability of digital innovation. You're throwing away job security for revenge." I stopped at the door and turned to look at her one last time. "It's not revenge," I said. "It's recognition. Someone finally recognized the value of work you consider garbage." In the next 48 hours, I had cleaned out my desk, completed all exit interviews, and started my new position at Mendoza Strategic Consulting. Their office was smaller than Digital Innovations, but filled with energy and mutual respect. More importantly, I was finally working with people who understood that deep analysis was the key to lasting solutions. But the real validation of my decision came in the following weeks, as I watched the consequences of Patricia's actions unfold with devastating precision. The clients I had worked with for 2 years began contacting me directly, not because I had solicited them, but because they had heard through professional networks that I had moved to a new firm, and they wanted to discuss their upcoming analysis needs with someone who understood their operations. Ramirez Industries was first. Their operations director, Miguel Ramirez, called me directly at my new office number. "Sarah," he said, "I heard you moved to Mendoza Strategic Consulting. Congratulations on the promotion. I wanted to ask you about your new firm's capabilities because we have some important projects coming up, and we prefer working with someone who already knows our systems." We talked for 2 hours about their expansion plans, the efficiencies we had implemented together, and how my new firm could help with their upcoming challenges. By the end of the conversation, I had scheduled a formal meeting to discuss transitioning their account to Mendoza Strategic Consulting. The second call came the next day. Herrera Construction wanted to know if my new firm could handle a process analysis for a new division they were opening. "You worked miracles with our project management system," their CEO told me. "You saved millions in penalties. If your new company can offer the same level of analysis, we're ready to make a switch." By the end of my first week at Mendoza Strategic Consulting, I had brought in 3 major accounts representing more than $2.5 million in annual revenue. Not because I had stolen them or violated any agreements, but because they preferred working with someone who provided the type of deep analysis that generated real results. Meanwhile, at Digital Innovation, Patricia was beginning to realize what she had really broken when she destroyed my report. I learned about her growing panic through mutual contacts in the industry. She had tried to contact Ramirez Industries for their quarterly review, only to discover they were no longer interested in renewing their contract. When she called Herrera Construction about future projects, they informed her they had found a consulting partner who better understood their operational needs. One by one, the clients I had worked with were making the decision to follow the person who had identified and solved their most costly problems. Patricia had believed client loyalty was tied to brand reputation. She was discovering that client loyalty was tied to results and trust in the analyst who had generated those results. 2 weeks after my departure, I received a call that revealed how devastating the situation had become for Patricia. It was from Fernandez Group, the client for whom I had identified the billing problems that were costing them millions. "Sarah," their financial director told me, "I need to tell you something I think you should know. Patricia called us yesterday trying to convince us to stay with Digital Innovation. When we told her we were considering following you to your new firm, she literally yelled at us over the phone." Apparently, Patricia had completely lost her composure. She had told them they were making an emotional decision instead of a business decision, that Mendoza Strategic Consulting didn't have the experience to handle their complex operations, that I was just a junior analyst who had gotten lucky with some findings. She hung up on us, the financial director continued, after telling us we would regret following a mediocre employee who didn't understand the difference between real analysis and show work. It was incredibly unprofessional. That call revealed everything about why Patricia's approach was failing so spectacularly. Even when faced with evidence that my work had generated measurable results, she couldn't acknowledge that maybe she had made a mistake in humiliating me publicly. Instead of reflecting on whether her judgment had been wrong, she was doubling down on her position and alienating clients in the process. By the end of my first month at Mendoza Strategic Consulting, 7 major digital innovation clients had made the transition to our firm. They represented more than 40% of my former company's annual revenue. Mendoza Strategic Consulting was thriving beyond their most optimistic projections, while digital innovation was experiencing the worst client retention crisis in their history. The most satisfying part wasn't the financial success, though that was incredible. The most satisfying part was knowing that Patricia had orchestrated this entire situation herself. She could have supported my deep analysis approach. She could have learned from the results I was generating. She could have recognized that my methodology was creating real value for clients. Instead, she had chosen to publicly humiliate me and destroy work that represented the foundation of the company's most profitable relationships, believing that her ego was more important than evidence of what actually worked. 3 months after my departure, I heard through the professional network that Robert Salinas had called an emergency meeting with the board of directors to address the client retention crisis. Digital innovation was facing the possibility of mass layoffs and restructuring to survive the revenue loss. Patricia, who had been so confident about her professional standards and concise analysis philosophy, was now struggling to explain how the company had lost almost half of its most important clients in 12 weeks. According to sources still working there, she had initially tried to blame my departure for the client defections, arguing that I had violated some kind of ethical agreement by taking the relationships with me. But the internal investigation revealed that all clients had made their decisions independently, based on their preference to work with someone who provided the type of analysis that had generated real results. The investigation also revealed something that completely destroyed Patricia's credibility. During the 2 years she had been criticizing my approach as mediocre and excessively detailed, my analyses had been directly responsible for more than $23 million in client savings. Not only had she been wrong about the value of my work, she had been actively sabotaging the most successful methodology the company had developed. 6 months after my departure, I received the call that perfectly completed this story of professional revenge. It was Robert Salinas, contacting me personally to discuss what he called a collaboration opportunity. "Sarah," he said, "I know this might sound strange after everything that's happened, but I wanted to ask if you'd be interested in returning to digital innovation as Director of Strategic Analysis. We're prepared to offer very competitive terms." The irony was perfect. 6 months after watching Patricia tear up my report while telling me I needed to do something worthy, they were recruiting me back to lead exactly the type of analysis she had considered garbage, with a salary that tripled my previous compensation. "I appreciate the offer," I told him, "but I'm very satisfied with my current position. Mendoza Strategic Consulting valued my approach from day one, rather than having to learn it through a crisis." "I understand," Robert replied. "But I need to ask you, what if I told you Patricia is no longer with the company?" It turned out the client retention crisis had led to a complete review of departmental leadership. Patricia had been invited to seek new opportunities after the board of directors concluded that her management approach had directly contributed to the most significant revenue loss in company history. "Her departure is part of a broader restructuring," Robert continued. "We're implementing a new philosophy that values deep analysis and strong client relationships. Basically, we're adopting the approach you developed." 1 year after leaving digital innovation, I was promoted to senior partner at Mendoza Strategic Consulting, with significant equity in the company and responsibility for expanding our deep analysis approach to multiple industries. The clients who had followed me from my old company became the foundation of our most successful year, and my methodology had become the gold standard for strategic consulting in our sector. But the real validation came when we started receiving calls from companies that wanted the type of analysis that Sarah Mitchell does. My name had become synonymous with deep analysis and measurable results. What Patricia had tried to bury as mediocre work was now recognized as innovative methodology. The most satisfying moment came during an industry conference, 18 months after my departure. I was presenting a case study on how our deep analysis approach had transformed a manufacturing company's operations, generating $15 million in annual savings. At the end of my presentation, during the Q&A session, a woman in the audience raised her hand. It was Patricia. "Sarah," she said, in a voice that no longer had the arrogance I remembered, "could you elaborate on how you implement the initial analysis phase? I'm working on developing similar methodologies." The irony was perfect. The woman who had torn up my report in front of 30 people, telling me I needed to do something worthy, was now asking me for advice on how to implement exactly the type of analysis she had considered garbage. "Of course," I replied with all the professionalism I could muster. "I start with an exhaustive analysis of all existing processes, documenting every inefficiency no matter how small it might seem. The key is not to settle for the superficial. You have to dig deep until you find the real root causes." I watched her take notes frantically, recording every word as if it were revolutionary wisdom. The same approach she had ridiculed was now the methodology she was desperate to learn. After the presentation, she approached me. "Sarah," she said, "I know things didn't end well between us, but I wanted to tell you that maybe I didn't fully appreciate your approach at the time. I've been following your work, and it's clear you've established something truly innovative." It was as close to an apology as Patricia would ever come, but I no longer needed her validation. The results spoke for themselves. "I appreciate that," I said. "But you know, Patricia, all this success started with a report that someone once tore in half. It turns out those unnecessary details were exactly what the industry needed." I saw her pale as she remembered that moment. "Sarah, don't worry about it," I interrupted. "That moment was the best gift you could have given me. It freed me to find people who truly valued what I had to offer." 5 years later, Mendoza Strategic Consulting had become the most respected process consulting firm in the region, with offices in 3 cities and a waiting list of clients who wanted to work with us. My deep analysis methodology had become the industry standard, being taught in universities and professional conferences. Digital innovation, on the other hand, had to merge with a larger company to survive after the client retention crisis. Robert Salinas had contacted me several times over the years, always with increasingly generous offers for me to return and help rebuild what we once had. But what he didn't understand was that it wasn't about what we once had. It was about what I had built from scratch, with people who had believed in my approach from day one. On my desk, in my corner office at Mendoza Strategic Consulting, I have the first page of that report Patricia tore up framed. Not as a reminder of the humiliation, but as a reminder that truly valuable work always finds a way to be recognized, no matter who tries to destroy it. And every time a client thanks me for identifying millions in savings, every time a colleague tells me my methodology transformed their way of thinking about analysis, every time I see my name at a conference as innovative methodology, I remember Patricia's words, "You need to do something worthy for once in your life." It turns out I was already doing something worthy. I just needed to find the right people to recognize it. The most perfect revenge isn't the kind that destroys your enemy. It's the kind that forces them to acknowledge you were right all along. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Because sometimes the best success stories begin with someone tearing up your work and telling you it's not good enough. And when that happens, remember, it's not always about proving them wrong. Sometimes it's about finding the people who were waiting for exactly what you had to offer.